Pereira. Since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content as well so that more people get to know about Bharata first. Well, the just concluded G7 summit took place under the shadows of the Ukraine war, which has threatened economic recovery. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic is still not over, and there are many points of tension in the Indo-Pacific region as well. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with the leaders of Argentina, Indonesia, Senegal, and South Africa, also attended some of the sessions. Their participation strengthened the goal of the G7 German presidency, progress towards an equitable world. India is going to take over the G20 presidency soon, and it is also an important member of the BRICS grouping. Since most of the issues discussed at the summit have broader implications and need wider ownership, India can become an important global player going forward, especially in the times that we are going through. In today's discussion, we will analyze India's role in the G7 and the recently concluded G7 summit. Joining me on the program today are Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador of India to Germany, and Sanjay Kapoor, editor, Hard News. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of the discussion. All right, Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and put into perspective India's participation at the G7 summit.
So thank you, Frank, and good to see you again. The G7 is a club of democracies who try and run the world as they see fit. And on occasion, there were G8 when they included Russia. Once Russia invaded Crimea, they quickly got rid of it. Now, how Russia qualified in their category as a democracy or whatever is not very clear. So while they say what they are, the way they operate is pretty ambiguous. Secondly, this meeting was held in the context of the Ukraine crisis. Now, what has happened since the Ukraine crisis, that all functionality of international relations is being sidestepped. So whether you talk of climate or you talk of health or you talk of food subsidies or agriculture, all these issues have become subservient to the Ukraine crisis. And the G7 is the spearhead of doing that. So though G7 is not a security organization, essentially they institutionalize the securitization of Europe. And therefore, even Japan, the one G7 country who is not in NATO, is attending the NATO summit. So G7 is basically taking everybody away from a purely economic agenda to kick the Russians' agenda. And that is not suitable to India. Second point, despite knowing India's reservations on the Ukraine crisis, particularly with regard to Russia, the G7 yet invited India as a guest to this time. And this is because Germany believes that democracies must stand together even if their thought processes are different. So I think this recognition of diversity is very important. So I would say these two current issues are the ones which take India into the G7, ultimately showing that no major world problem has a resolution unless India is a part of it.
Absolutely. Sanjay Kapoor, let me bring you into the picture now. Since we are here, just building on the points that the ambassador has just made, it shows also that India's stock has grown at the global stage. And despite India not looking eye to eye with regards to this particular issue of Ukraine, because G7 countries have a different perspective as far as G7 is concerned, India has made it very clear where we stand with regards to Ukraine and Russia. Despite that, everyone wants to engage with India. What does that say about India's stock at the global stage?
Thank you for inviting me, Frank. It's been wonderful to be on your panel and to hear Ambassador Gurjeet Singh also dilate on this issue. I'm a bit more, you can say, circumspect on this matter. I would not say, I wouldn't be very gung-ho about it. The reason what has been given by coming in from the Germans is that India was invited because it is, the next G20 meeting is going to take place in India, so they wanted India to be there. The other one is that you had Senegal, which had, they organized the African Union, and you had Argentina, which was there in the Latin American Union. So in a certain way, it was seen to be a force multiplier. You get 2 or 3 major countries which also represent the particular region, and you push the agenda within. And thirdly, India and Argentina and Indonesia, as well as Senegal, all have been doing business with Russia. They have not broken up or broken relationships. So there was an attempt by G7 countries to bring in pressure on them to somehow convince them to stay away from Russia. So in my reckoning, these were the reasons more, rather than feeling nice about the fact that India has been brought in because India's importance is growing, which it has. Yes, I'm not undeniably so. But the fact is there were other factors that were coming into play. The G7, if you look at it, took place at the time when you had 2 or 3 major things happening. As Ambassador Gurjeet Singh said, the Ukraine crisis is there staring at us. Been more than 150 days now since the war started. But more difficult part is that the kind of havoc it has caused when it comes to the economy, as well as when it comes to the food crisis, which has gripped more than 800 million people of the world. And we don't know how it is going to be controlled, because by and large, I don't think the world has enough food grain to supply if there is pressure on Ukraine or Russia to keep the food grain in check and not to allow its supply to these food grain strapped countries. So it's a very difficult environment in which G7 countries were meeting, and seemingly they stuck onto their agenda of putting pressure on Russia. There was, I don't think, an attempt to find a go forward to somehow find a way to bring peace in that area, because if they would have talked about peace, maybe India would have been a far keen participant in it. But nobody's talking about peace because Putin is not talking about peace, and this is a very worrying thing for countries which have a very ambivalent view about the war which is taking place in that region.
Absolutely. Ambassador, let's talk about another aspect as well, and what are the takeaways for India really from this summit, and what can India look forward to?
So I think I would classify 4 takeaways. And here I slightly diverge with Mr. Kapoor. It is not that India was invited only now. For the last 4 years, India has been a consistent invitee to the G7. India and South Africa are the 2 countries invited every year, including to the summit which didn't take place in 2020. The other countries keep changing depending on the host. So India is now consistently seen as a partner of the G7, just as the BRICS also sees us as a partner. The second part is that India does contribute in many ways. Let us take public health. So India's pharmaceuticals and India's vaccine production have both played a role in dealing with the pandemic. India's public security for food, which we fought for at the WTO, is today being used to actually feed countries who can't get grain out of Ukraine. Then on trade, India has moved center stage by now quickly signing FTAs with Australia, UAE, talking to the UK and EU. So we are not an outlier anymore. And on the sustainability and climate change agenda, India is part of the solutions. And I think, as Prime Minister Modi said, any technology that you bring to India, you have the chance of scaling it up manifold than in any other market. So I think these are advantages which people see in us. There is an unstated thing that people also want to move beyond China into resilient value chains, in which India, whatever its frailties, is yet seen as a new hub for services and manufacturing, where more and more people will come to set up China plus one facility. They may look small, they may look big, but this is happening. 2 other things which I would call takeaways. The first is the just energy transition partner. Now, this is something they offered South Africa on the sidelines of the Conference of Parties in Glasgow. And South Africa reported to G7 that this has worked very well. Essentially, this helps the country to transition from the current state of economy with the fossil fuels to a carbon neutral economy, but tries to address the challenges in between, reduce the pain. Now, Europe itself is feeling the pain right now because they have to get off Russian gas and oil and go back to coal. So they understand better that the energy transition is not easy. So this just energy transition, India, Indonesia, Senegal, and Vietnam was not at the G7, will also be included in it. So that means more technologies and finances are likely to flow to. And finally, the Partnership for Global Investment and Infrastructure, which is the earlier they called it Build Back Better, or the Green. This is for which the Germans have given us 10 billion euros when Prime Minister went for the Intergovernmental Council. This is a new thing, but I am not quite certain how it's going to work. So that part I would say is the takeaway, but what exactly we are taking away, I'm not clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, another aspect, Sanjay, that I'd like to take up with you as well is that, Prime Minister Modi also met several of his counterparts at the sidelines of the summit. We saw the media reporting several of those images back home as well, be it with President Biden or with Macron and several of the others. He also met his counterparts from Italy, Japan, and almost everybody else there as well. And at a time when many of these face-to-face meetings have been far and few to come by, it's a big victory for diplomacy, isn't it?
I think that is what diplomacy is all about, to create circumstances in which heads of states can really meet with each other, iron out whatever differences they might be having. Because what was stated earlier is that India doesn't get along with the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, and the fact is that they were seen to be pretty chummy, talking with each other. So there is always a possibility that all this show of happiness may be put on, but there is also a suggestion that could emanate from these meetings that you could meet again, you would iron out all the differences, go forward on certain issues. And there have been very, I think, friendly voices or noises that have come out from the meetings that Mr. Prime Minister had. But having said that, these are things that we should take it in our stride. I mean, if we are really have arrived, which I think is still some distance away, we need to be more circumspect about our own interests. We need to be more concerned about how we're going to, ride the two boats that we are in. We are we are on the same table as the G7 countries at the moment. Not always. This is the second time since 2014 we have attended a G7 meeting. In the past, when you had G8, we had Prime Minister Manmohan Singh attending 5 of such meetings. So what is happening is nothing truly extraordinary, whatever the spin doctors might say at the moment. But having said that, we also doing some business with the BRICS country, which have a different view altogether. Although India has been, talking about a Madhyamar, trying to suggest that it's important to work together, do business together. But the fact of the matter is that the G7 countries have made it amply clear that it's become a zero-sum game. If you are with China and Russia, you can't do business with them. And that is where I think India will have to take a few very tough decisions. How do you go forward on that?
Time to get closing comments now from both panelists with the best way forward and what next. Where do we go from here, Ambassador?
We really need to get the commitments the G7 countries make turn them into reality. They can't remain dreams and announcements. Now, if you see the recent WTO ministerial meeting, they did not budge on the TRIPS waiver for COVID vaccine. They did not budge on India's public security stocks for food. They did not budge on other trade and related issues or climate related issues. So what they do at G7 and what they do in reality when it comes to multilateral negotiations, there's a wide gap in it. Now, India is ready to provide food, but then India is providing food from the same stocks that the WTO said you can't maintain. So these contradictions we must move to resolve, and the only way to resolve them is by remaining engaged. And yes, I think Mr. Kapoor makes a valid point that we should stick with the BRICS as well. And out of the 5 invited countries, India and South Africa are BRICS members, and Argentina and Indonesia are candidate members who attended the last BRICS meeting. So I think we are all trying to play the middle path. We are not there to condemn Russia, China, or anybody. But yes, we must make sure the functional agenda, the rules-based order is not disrupted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. And finally, Sanjay Kapoor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Thank you. I think it is a very, very tricky moment at the moment for India. It is enjoying a certain kind of glow. It is right at the center of the entire, you can say, the happenings that are taking place. There is a desire on the part of the G7 Western Alliance to wean us away from wherever our interest lies in their reckoning. But we aren't very sure because of security reasons, because of how the West has treated us in the past. We think that Russia or China, for that matter, we could do business with them. And I think that is where we have to figure out how best we can really handle that situation. It is a very tricky one, but our diplomacy, the strength of our diplomacy would lie in how we can, either ride on 2 boats or at least, work with the BRICS countries.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Thank you, Ambassador, once again. And thank you, Sanjay Kapoor. Pleasure having you on the program. All right, then what's coming out of this discussion is that, India has a big role to play and an important role to play on the global scenario going forward. And don't forget that India is going to take over the G20 presidency very soon, and that is really going to have a big impact on how things are done across the world. At the moment, of course, especially the G7 countries are focusing heavily on Ukraine and want to tighten the noose as far as Russia is concerned. That is something that goes against our foreign policy, and we do not see eye to eye on that particular issue. But despite that, the world, especially the top countries around the world, want to continue to engage with India, want to continue to ensure that we still have a big role to play. What we need to get out of the G7 countries is firm commitments on the kind of promises that they are making and where they want to go forward. The game is definitely going to be in the Indo-Pacific. China is on the radar, and that's where India can play a big role. Now, before I go, let me once again, remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content as well. And don't forget to spread the word about Bharata First. And here's a message that I would like to share as I leave too. Cracking UPSC CSC is like running a marathon. To get across the line, you need the right guide and training partner. Look no further than Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. Classes by the best names and subject matter experts in the field. Courses designed to address all aspects of the challenges at hand. Highly affordable courses priced at less than 150 rupees. Register now at kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app now. Avail discounts of over 90%. Happy learning. Well, that was the message about the Bharata First Knowledge Center. So wait no further, go to kc.bharatafirst.com and subscribe to our courses right now. Massive discounts going on at the moment. Make full use of it. That's it from me. See you again next time.